So,
Recording is on.
all right. Hello, everyone. This is William Bell. I want to welcome you to the All Things Fulfilled YouTube channel and wherever else you may be watching this video. What I'm going to do in this video is try to compress a study that I've done by sharing a visual of that study to make it a bit more easy to follow and understand. As they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So if you are new to the channel, I want to welcome you and encourage you to continue to study. Make sure that you subscribe by hitting the red button. If you're on YouTube and clicking on the bell so that whenever we publish a new video, you will get a notification that a new video has been published, and so you can watch it. We appreciate that very much. So what I want to do is I want to talk about the Olivet Discourse and the epistle of 2 Peter 3, particularly chapters 2 and 3 that focus on the judgment, the end of the world. Typically, in the subject of eschatology, we have been told that 2 Peter 3 is a future end of the world. Well, what I intend to do in this video is to show from the correlations with the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24, Luke 17, and Luke 21, that all of this refers to the same event, that it is the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And in order to do that, what I'm going to share is an illustration that both Jesus used and that Peter used. And that was the examples of judgment from the time of Noah and from the time of Lot. Both of them used the same to talk about the parousia, and that's going to be the message. So let's go ahead and get underway. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share a screenshot with you on that I've laid out on the matter so that hopefully it will be much clearer to you as we express it. So here we are. Now, what you're looking at are just some examples from Matthew 24, Luke 17, 30 and 31, and also Luke 21, 20 through 22. And then we're going to compare what's said here with what we see over here. So now you've got a picture in front of you, you've got a graphic, and let's go ahead and get started. Now, in Matthew 24, as you know, many people say that that chapter is divided into two events, one being 70 AD from Matthew 24, about verse 3 down to verse 34. Sometimes they divide it at 35 or 36, not really sure where they want to make up their minds to divide it. But the point being is they do accept all of the previous verses down to about 34 as referring to the fall of Jerusalem. And of course, starting in verse 36, they argue that it's a reference to the future return of Christ. But I want you to notice some things that we find in the chapter. One, the Bible talks about the flight from Jerusalem. So let's look at that very quickly so that we try to compress our time in presenting this information to you. All right, the Bible says in verse 15, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. So what we have is the flight from Jerusalem at the time that the Roman army surrounded the city. And Jesus, of course, is warning his disciples, pre-warning them that when they see evidence of this, they need to get out of the city. Of course, if they were believers of Christ, they most definitely would leave, and that is in fact what they did, as we know from the history that's recorded of the event in Josephus and other histories of the era. Now, so we have the flight from Jerusalem, and we know that that's a part of the 70 AD experience. Then we have verse 36, and verse 36 is after verse 34 that says all these things, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. But let's look at verse 36. In verse 36, it says, but of that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. So this is taken as the unknown day, the day that no man knows the day and the hour, and therefore it must be a future day. It must be a future time because it was the day that no man knows the day and the hour. Now, that's not really true. If you have followed me in previous studies and other speakers like Don Preston, who have talked about the feast days, you would know that that was basically a Jewish idiom for the Feast of Trumpets and they knew when that day was coming. They just didn't know the specific day and hour, but it was one of the days that foretold and prefigured the Feast of Trumpets, or the time of judgment. At any rate, that day is compared to the days of Noah in Matthew 24, 37 through 39. So let's look at those verses. But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also will the coming of the Son of Man be. Now, did you notice that this was also a day that was unknown, because it says that they did not know until the flood came and took them all away. Now, this was talking about the ungodly, of course, who did not know because they weren't taking heed to the message that Noah was preaching. All right, then we find that this, of course, was the time for the coming of the Lord, and that he was going to come as a thief in connection with this event. Because when we look in verse 43, the Bible says, "But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken in two." So we have actually four particular points that we wanted to make from Matthew 24, that this was the coming of the Son of Man as a thief, that it was as it was in the days of Noah. It was that day and hour, which is considered as the second coming, the parousia, and it is during the time of the flight from Jerusalem. Now, not everyone will agree with all of those, because they'll try to separate the flight from Jerusalem in verses 15 through 18 from the last three, but our aim is to show that there is no separation. All right, now the next text we're going to look at is Luke chapter 17, verses 30 and 31. So let's turn over to Luke 17, look at that chapter, and see how the writer, that is Luke, aligns the very same events. He starts off in verse 26 and says, "And as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be also in the days of the Son of Man." So what does he do? He compares the days of Noah with the days of the Son of Man, with the parousia, with the coming of the Lord, just as Matthew did in Matthew 24, verses 37 through 39. And so he says, they ate, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. And remember, Noah said they did not know. Then in verse 28, he also adds the days of Lot. And he says, likewise, as it was also in the days of Lot, they ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they built. But on the day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. All right, so there you have two examples that are given as comparisons to the days of the Son of Man. You have the days of Noah and you have the days of Lot, both of which were days that the wicked did not know because they did not take heed to the message that was coming. So it was an unknown day. But remember, both of those happened in time, not at the end of time, and they were judgments upon the ungodly. But he says that is the same manner in which the coming of the Son of Man would be. And so in verse 30, notice that he says, even so will it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. The word reveal here is the term apocalypsis. And then in verse 31, in that day, he who is on the housetops. Now, notice what Luke does. Luke takes these same examples of the days of Noah and the days of Lot and combines them with the flight from Jerusalem, because he says that this flight from Jerusalem would occur in that day. And by the way, it would make no sense for anyone to be trying to flee back to the housetops or in the country to return back to Judea, Jerusalem, etc., if the earth was on fire. All right, that just wouldn't make any sense to get their goods out of the house. They'd already be burned to a crisp by that time. But nevertheless, he says, in that day, he who is on the housetop and his goods are in the house, let him not come down to take them away. And likewise, the one who is in the field, let him not turn back. So do you see very clearly that what Luke does is puts this flight from Jerusalem in the same time as the coming of the Son of Man? He says, even so will it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed, in that day. So you cannot separate this fleeing event from the day of the Son of Man. And that is the day that was compared to the days of Noah and the days of Lot. So we are talking about the judgment. We're talking about the day when the Son of Man is revealed, the coming of the Lord, and therefore the unknown day of Matthew 24. Well, that should be enough for the reasonable person, the person, with common sense, logic, and reasoning to understand what's going on here. But we're going to take it a step further. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at Luke chapter 21. And in Luke chapter 21, another example of the Olivet Discourse, where Jesus is predicting events concerning the destruction of Jerusalem. He says in Luke 21 and verse 20, verse 20, but when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. So here is the subject of the destruction of Jerusalem very, very clearly. And he says, when these Roman armies would surround the city, you would know that its destruction is near. Notice what he aligns with that very clearly. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the midst of her depart, and let not those who are in the country enter her. Why? For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. Now, notice that Luke says they are the days of vengeance, and that this is the time when all things written would be fulfilled. But it is also this flight from Jerusalem at the time when the Roman armies would surround the city. So we have a couple of things here. Now, isn't it interesting that when you talk about in Matthew 24, for example, that day and hour and being as the days of Noah and the coming as a thief, no one would deny that that is when all things written would be fulfilled. As a matter of fact, pretty much everyone who understands the coming would understand that to be the time when all things written would be fulfilled. Even in Luke 17:30, in that day when the Son of Man is revealed, again, that would be when all things written are fulfilled. But Luke tells us very plainly that these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. And yet sometimes people want to give us some pushback and say, well, no, that's just all things regarding the destruction of Jerusalem. But here's the point. In every one of these, we have the common theme of the flight from Jerusalem, but we've seen that the flight from Jerusalem is connected with the example for the days of Noah and for the days of Lot. Now, when we move to 2 Peter chapter 2, we are clearly discussing a time of judgment. This is what is considered as the final judgment, as some people like to term it, even though the word final is never used for it. But it is the eschatological judgment, the end time judgment. And in 2 Peter chapter 2, notice that Peter compares the same examples of Noah and Lot with this judgment. Now, the point that we're making is Peter would not use these examples to talk about a judgment that was different from the one Jesus used it to talk about. I mean, they wouldn't be giving the same examples to talk about two different judgments now, would they? Obviously not. So that tells us that we're dealing with the exact same judgment. So let's listen to what Peter says. He says in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 1, but there were also false prophets among the people, even as there will be false teachers among you, who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the Lord who bought them, and bring on themselves swift destruction. That sounds like some vengeance going on there to me. And many will follow their destructive ways, because of whom the way of truth will be blasphemed. By covetousness, they will exploit you with deceptive words. For a long time, their judgment has not been idle, and their destruction does not slumber. So he's talking about a judgment that has been in store for quite a while, but was now about to take place. Now, then he says in verse 4, for if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to Tartarus and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment. So now we're getting into the subject of this judgment, this eschatological judgment, the end times judgment. But look at what he compares it to. The same thing that Jesus compared it to in the Olivet Discourse. He says, and did not spare the ancient world, but saved Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood on the world of the ungodly, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them to destruction, making them an example to those who afterward would live ungodly, and delivered righteous Lot, who was oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked. So what are the two examples we have here? We have the days of Noah and we have the days of Lot. What were they compared to in the Olivet Discourse? To that day and hour of which no man knew, where Jesus was coming as a thief, and therefore to his parousia, but also to the flight from Jerusalem, which was called the days of vengeance, where all things written would be fulfilled. And it was the revealing of the Son of Man. So could we be talking about a different judgment here in 2 Peter 2? Absolutely not. It has to be the same thing. Well, 2 Peter 2 discusses the very same thing in 2 Peter chapter 3. And he is reminding them actually of what he said in 1 Peter, the first epistle of Peter. Therefore, it discusses the same thing as well. And I don't want to take the time to even correlate all of that. I hope that you will take the time to go back and see the references he made to the end of all things, 1 Peter 4:7, to the resurrection, 1 Peter 4:5, and to the time of judgment, which had come in 1 Peter 4:17. But nevertheless, let's look at what we have here. So now that we've compared that, when Peter begins to talk about the judgment in the second epistle, chapter 3, notice he goes back to the illustration of Noah once again, because he talks about the flood. So he says in verse 3, first of all, let's talk about the parousia. He says, knowing this first, that the scoffers will come in the last days, walking according to their own lust, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. For this they willfully forget. They willfully forget that by the word of God, the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of water, and in the water, by which the world that then existed perished, being flooded with water. What example is that? It is the example of Noah. So you have the example of Noah in chapter 3, in chapter 2, but you also have it in the Olivet Discourse. And what is it connected to? The flight from Jerusalem, 3 times in the Olivet Discourse. How can it be a different judgment, since it is the judgment that comes as a thief, and in the day that no man knows the hour in the Olivet Discourse, and be a different judgment in 2 Peter chapter 3? But notice also that 2 Peter tells us that this judgment was coming as a thief in the night. Verse 10 of 2 Peter 3, but the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Both the earth and the works that are in it shall be burned up. And so from this, we can see that it is the exact same event. And that tells us that 2 Peter 3 occurred when the flight from Jerusalem occurred, and that was in 70 AD, the days of vengeance, when all things written were fulfilled. Well, I hope you got the gist of what we were sharing with you, and that it makes sense to you, so that once, let's see, where are we now? I'm trying to find out how to get out of my sharing mode here. So let's see if we can manage to do that. And I apologize for the confusion that's going on at the moment. But let's see if we can handle, how do we get out of here? Here we are. Okay. All right. I think this will do it. Let's see. Yeah, there we are. All right. So we're out. All right. Again, I apologize for the little confusion there, but I'm using a different program to record this video. And so I'm not as familiar with it as I am using Zoom and various other software resources and streaming resources that I've used before. So I hope that that gives you an example of how to respond to people who want to take 2 Peter 3 and put it off into the future, which we have demonstrated in this video that it cannot be done. It is tied to the flight from Jerusalem. It's tied to the Olivet Discourse. It's tied to the days of Noah and the days of Lot. And those are the same comparisons made in 2 Peter chapter 2 and chapter 3. And therefore, they're all one event. And that should just lock it down so that you can't try to push it off into the future anymore. With that, I want to once again thank you for tuning in and watching the video. Hope it didn't go too long for you. I'm trying to not make them very long. In addition, hope the graphics helped you. And if you need that chart, I can make sure that you get a copy of it. In addition, make sure you subscribe. We've already said that once, but I want to remind you again to subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell, click on the bell so that you'll get a notification every time we do a video. Visit our website and download our mobile app. If you want to get all of our videos directly to your phone, you can do that. The mobile app is free. And we'll see you in the next video. Thank you. I'm William Bell. This is All Things Fulfilled. Have a great evening.